Alrighty. It's like watching the stock market. Like, oh, here comes the participants. Woo! Here they come. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another Prevalent webinar. And it is just the gals today here. I have Brenda Ferraro, our VP of Third-Party Risk here at Prevalent. Brenda, how are you today?
I'm doing well. The weather here is really nice. I feel for all the people on the East Coast because
Oh
we're in
gosh.
the 75s. You and I both live in Arizona and everybody else might be in a cold state. So stay warm.
Yeah, I feel for this. I feel for this. I'm about to go to the East Coast, so I'm about to hit a lot of snow. But today we are talking about supply chain risk, fourth parties and beyond, and funny story, very quick. We thought, well, I thought really, and I put Brenda on the train, that this was about Star Wars for some reason. So anyone that registered thinking this is Star Wars themed, I take the blame for this. I don't know why I thought this was Star Wars, but I guess Beyond is Toy Story. And fun fact, today marks the 35th anniversary of the creation of Pixar. So I feel like it's aligning in some ways, but we don't have any fun like Buzz Lightyear stuff or Star Wars. So truly sorry. But this will be entertaining nonetheless, and you're going to learn something, and that's what we want to do at the end of the day. So a couple of housekeepings. We are recording this session. You'll get it in your inbox tomorrow for you to share and watch again. You guys are all muted and we can't see you, but please do the Q&A because we're going to do it live. So I encourage you guys to really pay attention and ask while Brenda's talking, and I will just chime in and ask the questions right hot on the spot. We'll also do a poll question at the end where we'll ask you where you're at with your third-party risk management program. Be honest, because I will follow up with you personally. And I think that's about it. And then we'll answer any other questions you guys may have at the end, but we're excited. This is a big one and important because of the SolarWinds fiasco, and Brenda will talk about it. So I'm going to let Brenda take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, so you were not alone when you were talking about the Star Wars, because when we started thinking about May the 4th be with you, it's not the 4th, it's May, right? So everything's in May. And
Yeah.
I was corrected as well. So obviously in trivia, I would have lost that, but you had some trivia on Toy Story. So thank you for doing that. You're making me cry at the same
No
time.
one asked us for any trivia questions for Star Wars. Obviously, we don't know what the heck we're talking about. So,
But we do know what we're talking about when it comes to fourth parties. So we're going to
that is right.
So
Stay
for
tuned.
thanks, and do chime in. So Amanda, I'll be looking for you to pop back on screen whenever a question comes in. I want this to be interactive. All right. So for fourth party and supply chain risk, this is something that has been near and dear to my heart for a very, very long time. I have been talking about the fact that we should know in our third party risk programs what our supply chains and our sourcing chains are doing with other engagements and associations with other companies. We have in the past been doing a great job of finding out who we're working with from a third party perspective, but our accountability and responsibility does not stop there. So we're going to talk about some of the strategies, and this webinar is not going to be, hey, here's the thought leadership things that we think that you should be doing. We're actually going to be showing you some of the capabilities that our company at Prevalent has decided to put in place to help you gain information and know what to do, whether it was a SolarWinds incident or an event, or whether it's I need to find out who my third parties are working with and how to build this big, huge, beyond universe vendor risk management database. So we talked about that a couple webinars back in 2020, but now we can start discussing what those things are today. So the topics we're going to go over are the techniques to discover and map your nth party relationship. And I say nth party because you could be working with a company that might have a third party and a fourth party and a fifth party, and they keep shifting each time someone is working in a relationship and has an engagement. So right now, if I was doing business with Amanda, she would be my third party. If she was doing business with one of you on the phone, you would become my fourth party, but you're actually her third party. So saying nth party makes it just much easier. We're going to talk about strategies to build a very deep and broad, comprehensive vendor risk management database. Some people are calling this a supply chain or a sourcing chain management database, so those acronyms might change up. But for today, the purpose, we'll just call it a VRMDB. Then we also have solutions that we're going to help you to understand how am I going to accelerate knowing that vast universe of who my nth parties are, and what if I have an incident or an event, and how do I find out if I'm impacted by that, or can I do anything proactive in efforts to make sure that if one of my industry peers were impacted, how do I find out if I was impacted as well? There's also reporting. So in the case of SolarWinds, you are all probably being exposed to the fact that the executives and or your boards were wanting to know, were we impacted? How were we impacted? Who are we working with that was impacted? And what do we do with that incident information from a discovery perspective and also from an action perspective? And then finally, we will talk about program requirements to avoid the one and done audit clause, because in the past, most of our contracts, our business agreements have been requesting that we do an assessment and we know our due diligence of our third party level or perimeter. Now we need to look at the next perimeter. And how do we do that? If our contracts say we're only going to look at the third party and we expect you as a third party to hold the accountability to do the proper due diligence with whomever else you decide to work with, whether we've agreed or approved for you to do that, or whether you haven't told us yet. So it's a big agenda today. But again, I promise you, please ask questions as we're doing these discussions, because I think things will pop into your head as we talk about them. So let's talk about what we know. What we're facing today, many of you can be sitting in any of these bullets in this column, but where do you start? That is a huge question. I don't know how I'm going to find out who my fourth or nth parties are. I don't know exactly where I need to be starting. And how do I identify those and the attributes of importance? Because we don't want to know everything. That ends up becoming noise. We want to know why they're working with them and exactly what's being done with that particular nth party. Are we transferring data, hopscotching past two companies? Are we hosting and processing data in different cloud environments and CSP, the cloud service providers? And then how do you connect all those dots within the VRMDB? There's taxonomy. So for example, some companies are calling third, fourth, and fifth parties tiers, but we also call our third parties different tiers like high, medium, and low, or A, B, and C, or red, green, and blue. So when we talk about the nth parties, we need to be able to translate exactly what's happening from industry to industry. Oh, and it looks like we have a question. And see, I told you, we're going to break in and start asking these. So Amanda, what do we got?
So I have a question right off the bat, and it's a curiosity question. Looks like they're asking, Brenda, what GRC tool do you use for the VRM for you?
Okay, so I'm going to say that a VRMDB can be hosted and handled within the Prevalent solution. Now, if you're talking about a GRC solution, I have seen some that have the capabilities to collect information from sources that we also collect information from. So in order for you to do the proper due diligence, one, look at Prevalent, of course, and two, there are some others out there that you can also look at. You can look at any threat intelligence company might be doing that at this point. And then you also have some other companies that are brand new that are starting to try to link together all of these databases of information as well. But again, look at ours first and then go and look at the other ones just to make sure you know that we're doing more and if not better than some of them.
And spoiler alert, you'll learn about it a little later on. So
that
was a little premature of a question for us to answer, but I wanted to.
But it's good to it's good to know, because when I was building my program, we didn't have it. I was using, to be frank and honest, I was using Archer at that time, and we were struggling 5 or 6 years ago. There's probably some things that they've done to enhance their product to do these management databases, but it's not as simple as just a configuration management database as we know it in the past. This is something that needs to have many attribute components in it as well. So we'll be showing you a screen of what that can look like.
Okay,
all right.
Continue on.
Okay, so pop back on when you get another one. Hopefully that answered whoever's question it was that asked. The other things that we're facing is transparency on supply chain risk handoffs. And what that means is if I'm doing business with Amanda, I want to know exactly what I am doing with her. And when there's handoffs, how is that going to be impacting my business? How can I interlink and connect the dots with the service, the data, the physical security components, what type of things we're doing with them, and how that will impact my business for resiliency. Then the other thing that we face, the last two actually, is what controls are important and how do I know that they meet up with my risk tolerance goals? And then what KPIs, the performance indicators, and what KRIs, the key risk indicator metrics, are useful. So here's what we've found in talking to many experts, what is needed. So we need to make sure that in the procurement and sourcing cycle, that during discovery, onboarding, and updates of engagements, you're learning exactly how those dots are being connected. And it would be mandatory if I were to start a business or to do a program where I would engage and partner with my procurement and sourcing organization to say, okay, here are the things I need you to collect up front. If you're not going to collect them up front, and let me know before I do an assessment or while I'm doing an assessment, I'm going to be asking for it after the fact. Because in order for us to know our risk tolerance, we need to know these different types of attributes for resilience. The VRMDB needs to reflect scenarios and be able to show us impact analysis. So if I were to have a threat landscape of all of my connections of dots, which you'll see coming up in the future of this webinar, I'm going to show you a screenshot excerpt of what exactly we can do in efforts to know the down chain and the up chain impact. So as long as you're connecting those attributes, then you're able to see if this company is no longer able to provide service, then how is it going to impact my business? And do I have another company on the sidelines that is doing the same thing, or they may be my backup company for concentration risk, whether it's too many that you have to only one, which is a single point of failure. We'll also need to make sure that we are looking at what is the criteria for the associations, and I'll list those out as well. Then we've got the business and vendor relationships. We know that relationships are the most important thing when it comes to doing business with each other. Relationships require us to trust each other. It requires us to make sure that we are respectful, where we're telling people if there's a breach, we're telling companies if we've been impacted, we're sharing information so that we can be as a globe as secure as possible. And then support. So making sure that that support is being maintained in the agreement and the expectations that we had with each other. So with that relationship concept and all of those ethics and morals that go along with it, as long as we know the vendor and the business components, then that's going to help us out as well with that VRMDB. Now, the supply and source chain workflows can be a little bit different. So when you have a supply chain, the supply chain has been tattooed in my brain by a very respectable individual of the supply chain is inbound. That's what services we're getting as they're helping us to become a certain type of business or providing services. And then the sourcing chain is outbound. So you have up chain and down chain scenarios that can happen. So when you think about your nth party and your supply chains and your vendor management systems, it's not just as simple to say, okay, we have a vendor and here's how we're using them. That vendor could be a supplier or they could be an outsourcer. And so we need to look at those a little bit differently, and we'll talk about the engagement requirements for each. And then finally, the other important thing, because you cannot manage what you do not measure. I mean, that's something that we all know and have learned. the key controls and the risk and metrics for reporting is something that's important for us. So I'll talk about an example of what happened with SolarWinds and how we were able to identify who was impacted very rapidly for some of our customers. Any questions, Amanda, or are we still good?
We're good.
All right. Well, here's one. How do I learn end-to-end supply or sourcing chains? How do I learn them? I feel like I can't connect the dots. I can't identify the key controls, and I can't visualize the value. So that's one thing that is on everybody's mind. Most mature companies will already have some things in play, but we're all kind of in the same state where it's like all of a sudden, because we've gone through what we've gone through in 2020, and because we've been experiencing what we had to with SolarWinds, I kind of call SolarWinds the, when we used to talk about third party, we used to say target in quotes was what brought us to be more efficient in the third party space. Now SolarWinds is helping us to become more efficient in the incidents of third party risk. So it's near and dear to my heart for that too, because I did incident management for 2 years. So it's important for us to get all of that information. So we've got these risks that are happening. We've got supply chain breakdowns that are seeming to come up to us from 2020 and now hitting us all over the place. And we've got data breaches, of course, with SolarWinds, and then compliance violations that we're always having to look out for. And that doesn't stop at the third parties. It then goes into the nth party, because if I was to report to a board that I was impacted by a third party, they're going to want to know, did that third party work with any other company? And were they impacted as well? Where was the root cause? What are the facts? Where did it come from? So that's what this VMDB is going to help you with. Now, one other individual that I work with a lot, one of our luminary customers, he made a statement during one of our last webinars. So if you go listen to it, it was probably 2 webinars ago. He said, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. So regardless of where you are today, this is where we need to start. You need to get the data and discover the connection. So if you haven't done that, I'm going to help you to learn some of the ways that you can. And then you need to build that comprehensive VRMDB so that you have that, I guess it would be like a command center. So you could see that huge dashboard and be able to slice and dice the information to show where things are happening. And then of course, automate and engage your enterprise holistically. Don't work in a silo in TPRM or in third-party risk governance, TPRG. You need to also make sure that you're working with procurement, because you're really good friends. They're the beginning of everything that happens. And in order to make sure that you know what you're working with, they're the ones that give you the insight and a good start for inherent risk and so on and so forth. So profiling risk, inherent risk, residual risk, how they all interlink together. Procurement and sourcing is going to be where you want to begin. Now, in your contracts, we're going to want to look at your contract to see, did you state that they were going to be assessed on a continuous basis? Of course, you've got the clause in your contracts that said we will be able to audit you once a year. That's something that's standard in every contract. But I found that when you adjust your contract for third-party relationships, you need to have a stipulation in there that makes it aware to them that you have a program and your program is continuous. It's not a one and done. You will be able to assess them at any time. You may have a incident management campaign that you ask them about, and that will be something that they will be expecting so that they don't push back when they receive a little questionnaire, or if you find an alert in your threat intelligence that you want to ask for more information. It's a relationship that's ongoing. It's not just, hey, we're going to do business with you and hopefully you will provide the service, and then someday maybe we'll do a review with you at the end of the year. It's not like that anymore. Risks are there, vulnerabilities are there, and we need to manage them consistently and real time. Amanda, that means this is another question.
Also, perfect timing for my landscaper to be like right at the door right now. So sorry for the background noise, but question, is it realistic to determine the 4th, 5th, nth parties by working with the actual vendor relationship owner?
That is the first step, but no, it's not realistic to have to ask them, because you want to ask them because they should be telling you who they're working with. But there are automated ways to find out who else people are working with, and we'll go over that. So if you start at least with saying, I want to ask my third party who my fourth parties are, and the fourth parties are responsible for telling them who the fifth parties are, building that vendor risk management database with all of the components and hands in one spot will be able to update. So I would be able to tell Amanda, if she was the third party and I was the fourth party, I would tell Amanda, I am using Amazon Web Services and the cloud. I am using, we'll just pretend SolarWinds in the best version possible. And I am using, we'll just say maybe Adobe Acrobat, or it could be even another vendor. And then that way she would have that information at her fingertips, because as the due diligence chain falls or rises, then that information can be uploaded into the system if they're all using the same system, or it can be provided by a campaign of outreach, and then you can update the information that way as well. And threat monitoring too. So we're going to go over that. All right, good question. So this is what you've all been kind of thinking in the background, is like, okay, Brenda, stop talking about what we need to do. Show us what's available. So I'm going to show you some of the capabilities that we have within our product that can help. Now, this could be complementary to what you're using today, or it could be something that you use singularly within our platform. So accelerating a fourth party. What we have in our vendor threat monitoring profile is an enhanced entity profile. So by just typing in a URL address or a domain address, you will be presented with all of this information from a technology perspective, where they're located, what tags we want to put with them, what fiscal year ends they have, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn accounts, all kinds of different things. And there's a question.
Sorry.
No, this is good. I feel like I'm teaching a class at school and someone's raising their hand. So I don't want them to sit there and wait with their hand up. Let's see what I can answer again.
Here we go. Next question. Since a company's supply chain network with nth parties added would be quite vast, how do you generally determine how far and wide into a network to work towards visibility and active monitoring?
Yes. So I believe that ownership of, and I'm going to give you an analogy, which you're probably going to think I'm crazy about. So I got a new puppy, and this puppy is going to need care when I'm doing webinars. So in order for me to vet the person who's going to be watching my puppy, I'm going to do some analysis on that person to say, okay, do you do certain things? Here's the controls that you have to have in place. Now, say, for example, she wasn't available for a webinar coming up and I needed my puppy to be quiet. She's going to outsource that to someone. And I would expect her in the past to vet that person and make sure that they're also going to be doing the same type of correctional type stuff with controls with the puppy as well. Now it's getting to the point where I want to know from her at the get-go, who are you going to be working with? And I want to do that vetting myself, or show me exactly who that person is and what they're doing, or what that business is and what they're doing. Now, in that case, that person might do it as well. But, you know, seriously, this puppy is very near and dear to my heart, as my business is too. I'm going to want to take it all the way until it stops. It's hard. And it sounds impossible, but it's not going to be, at least by mid-year 2021. So hopefully that answered the question. It looks like another one came up, or maybe a follow-up.
Yes, it did. Can past supply chain breakdowns be helpful in identifying the links in the chain?
Yes, definitely. So when you know about a breach or something, or a vulnerability or something that's happened to a company, you should be able to document that and or have it automatically reflect into your VMDB or VRMDB. And what happens then is it's going to start expanding in the database to show that there are some situations that are happening. And when you're in a part of a network, then that network can also be shared. That information can be shared with the network, so that your friends or your peers in that industry, or even in a agnostic industry network, will start to be able to see, oh, wait a minute, something just happened. I wonder if I have that particular vendor connection within my chain, I now need to go and look and see proactively if there's something I need to put in place to protect myself from harm. I'm never going to get through this screen. These questions are great.
This is a trial run and we're just going with it. Okay.
Next question.
How do you identify nth parties for private companies since most of the information is non-public?
So you're going to have to ask. It is an area that you don't want to be big brother and put an agent on your data center. And you've got some ways that you can ask them. And in your contracts, you can stipulate that they need to tell you. And then you just need to make sure that each of the chains down below are doing the same thing. So first, I would just get started with getting information from the companies of which you can. And then with this vendor threat intelligence, like even with these technologies, Google is being used as an example. They work with a lot of technologies. In here, you could probably find Salesforce. You can also PeopleSoft. I mean, there's all these different companies in here. But then the next thing that you need to do is say, well, which ones matter to me? This is a lot of companies that they work with. Which ones are part of my engagement and do I care about? But not only that, if I were to see that they were impacted, if you saw SolarWinds in here, for example, if SolarWinds was impacted, then I would want to make sure with Google that, okay, if you're using SolarWinds, how are you remediating the issue so that we can look at the incidents from that perspective? So the question to answer it specifically is, it's going to take us a while. Don't think it's going to be magically bippity boppity boo from a Disneyland. You know, here it's all in front of us. But as we grow the VRMDB and as we identify the information in the threat intelligence from the sources that we can get access to, then we're going to be able to see the daisy chain effects.
I have another question.
I know, I saw that. It pops up on the bottom of my screen. So.
Oh, you do see it too? Okay. Wow, we're all learning here.
I don't see the question. I just see a little bubble.
Oh, okay. How realistic is it to trace a chain back to the point of a product's assembly or even the point of natural resource extraction?
I will have to get back to you on that. I would basically start my program by saying, we're going to attempt to go to a certain level. Like I think we went to the 5th or 6th level when I was running a program. I said, we're going to stop at the 6th level. But that was just to make sure that during an audit, they wouldn't come back to me and say, well, you didn't know about this. But I would have something in place past that 6th level in order to know that I can do a campaign outreach. So if I didn't have the assessment knowledge in my vendor risk management database up to a certain level, then I would at least have another process to engage upon in order to go towards that direction. But Amanda, take that question down, find out if you can get the person's name, and we'll respond.
Yeah, great. I'm gonna sidebar you, send you an email, all that fun stuff. Okay, let's continue.
Okay, did another question come up, or is that just the same one?
That was Tim, and I'm closing it out. And you are G to G, my friend. Continue on.
So as we were discussing, right now within our platform, we are at the phase where you would have to find out from the vendor or the company which of these technologies they're working for, and then you would be able to create an association. In Q2 of this year, probably around mid-year, we're going to have it so that it will be a push-pull capability where the vendor will be able to tell you without having to answer a questionnaire. They'll just click on the things that they're associated with, and it will automatically make that the VRMDB database spiderweb diagram that you're going to see on the next slide. So I'm going to change to the next slide. Amanda, I saw another one pop up. Is that a question or just the person's name from the previous?
Sorry. It's a comment based on the previous question, and I'll share it really quick. It's another viewer saying, I think the answer to the last question is you have to work backwards or from raw materials to first level supplier. So
that's very good point. Yes, thank you. Thank you from the audience. All right, so when you build a VRMDB, we talked about the nth party span of risk and how far it can go. You can look at things in a list format, but you can also look at things in a bubble diagram, or some people call this a spider diagram. And as you'll notice on this particular diagram, Acme Inc. is the company that is my third party. And it shows that there are other companies that they're working for or with. There is data transfers that are happening to and from. It also shows who's hosting data centers and where they're being hosted. It also will show if it goes out past the second party to someone's sixth party to a tiering entity. It's all over the place. So when you're creating that customer data transfer, for an example, and data transfer is only one of the things. We could look at services, we could look at manufacturing, transportation. I'm just using data transfer as an example. You'll notice that if I were to, in the system, you're not seeing it now, you would have to ask for a demo. But in the system, if I hover over and I can expand out and contract in to see what I want to see, I can hover over one thing and it will highlight where the connections are. So if SolarWinds were to happen, Zeus application company, that pink dot, it would show, it would highlight, okay, it is going to be impacting third party 6, but it's also going to be impacting Acme Inc. because I'm receiving a data transfer from them. If that was something that SolarWinds was going to then transfer to me. I'm not saying that it would, it's just as an example. I should probably stop saying SolarWinds. I'll just say a vulnerability or a breach, because poor SolarWinds, I feel for them. They were victimized and we don't need to go into that. But basically you would be able to take the landscape and show proactively, if you were to find out if something was to be impacted, how that's going to impact the resilience of your business or where things are going to be hit. And then that way you can show exactly where, what campaign it would help to identify, sending out risks, creating risks for those companies to make sure that they respond back on how they're mitigating that particular vulnerability. So any questions on this particular screen? Otherwise, we will move ahead. All right.
Nope, sorry, we got one.
Nope. They came in a different channel. I was like,
yeah, different channel. It says, with the enhanced interest in ESG throughout the supply chain, are industry organizations like shared assessments offering information and guidance?
Yes. So all of the companies and organizations that are working with ESG, that's being something, and we had a webinar about that a week ago or maybe 2 weeks ago. I had Alpa and Tracy, they both talked about ESG. And Shared Assessments has a conglomerate of member resources that are talking about how ESG is intertwined and looped into the new things that we're supposed to be looking at. And inclusive of that, this VRMDB should be upholding information about ESG as well. So it's questionnaires, vendor threat monitoring, data transfers, all the different things that you might want to be associating. So you would be able to create risks, associate the companies, and then know exactly how to go down those roads. But the answer specifically is yes, I do have knowledge that Shared Assessments has some guidance on ESG. Great. And that's environmental, social, and governance.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Number 2, do we need another one?
No, I don't think so.
No, okay. So if there's another one, let me know. So strategy. So from the strategy perspective, look at your contracts. Make sure that your contracts have context for liability and accountability of how far the daisy chain up and downstream you want to go. Make sure you're working with relationships and managing those with your key stakeholders and business units so that you can connect the dots with what businesses are providing services to what companies and internal and external businesses up and down the chain. Have partner touch points. And when those touch points are identified, where's the handoff occurring and what type of handoff is happening? Control requirements, making sure that you have the right controls for the service, the tier, and the category in order to make sure that not only are you looking at the VRMDB from a holistic landscape perspective, but if you were to select on any one of those bubbles that you saw on the screen before, it could also deep dive into what their risks were. That way you can tie up all the risks, the security controls, and the things that you need to look at. ESG included is one of them. And then for change management, we all know that when we get a good vendor, we want to do more work with them. So it might end up where you're doing more services or they're providing more things to you. And you want to make sure that your assessments are including those changes in scope. Now, from a platform perspective, it needs to hold all your vendor data. And it needs to make sure that it is connecting the dots, of course, to the nth parties for the content that you're gathering, hopefully from procurement and sourcing at the get-go. And if not there, then at the time you're running your threat intelligence, and if not there, at the time that you're doing any type of touch points with questionnaires. And role-based access will help to do and build the workflows and the task management on the interconnections and the relationships that you have with those vendors in the business as well. And then collaborate internally with your departments and your vendors to make sure that that relationship stays intact for trust and support and respect. Now, from a perspective on the platform, always look at your risk intelligence if you have it available, and that's going to help you to identify for those companies that provide it to you, like Prevalent, what technologies companies are working with. And then from your due diligence and your asking of where's the information coming from a questionnaire perspective, you can also look at a network capacity of how will that network help you to identify if something is awry before it hits your company. It's kind of like an ISAC or an ISAO support system. And ISACs are the information sharing and collaboration centers that are industry-wide and then also collectively. Now, the automated platform is what you need to look to get to. Some of you might be using single spreadsheets and keeping them in a SharePoint site or a GRC that may or may not provide you the interconnections of, I can look at an entity holistically as one, or I can look at an entity with a grouping from a VP perspective or a region, or I can look at everything all at one time. So you have to have machine learning and artificial intelligence capability in your automation that while you're building your VRMDB, a great time of that would have been when we had the last impact that we all had to look out for. And then for offloading the nth party collection and analysis, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I'm a person of one. There's a lot of TPRM and TPRG teams that are only one person. We've got people who can help you, and we've got networks that we can engage you in, and then also advisory and consulting services that can help you to evolve building that particular database. Is that a new question, Amanda, or am I seeing bubbles?
No, it's a new question. You ready? To what extent is the discovery and mapping process the platform offer is, wait, I'm saying this wrong. To what extent is the discovery and mapping process the platform offer is fully automated, question mark, or is it heavily depending on your outreach campaign, question mark?
So right now, as I had mentioned before, the automation of that is going to become very easy mid-year this year. At present, you can create, you can do the VTM report and it shows all at least the technologies. And then with the questionnaire, you can then associate which ones are applicable to your engagement. So it's a little bit manual right now, but in the future, it will be automated, like I had mentioned, where the vendor will be able to look at what is identified from the threat intelligence and select the items. And then you'll know from that, and you won't have to ask them a question. You can basically say, did you go and associate your fourth parties and fifth parties? And they can answer yes or no. And then you can have a risk on those versus having to go in and manually connect the dots. So right now, for the next couple months, you'll have to connect the dots, but doing that discovery is important nonetheless. So use your VTM to see what your technologies there are, use your questionnaires to ask what businesses they're working with, and then connect the dots that way for now. We all want it to be done now. I wish it was automated now from our perspective, but they're working very, very diligently on it. So I'm excited to see when it comes to fruition. Now, speaking of SolarWinds, or the last vulnerability that we all had to address, we helped our customers with incident response using the platform by way of giving them the ability to discover what entities were impacted by SolarWinds, because a lot of companies, they did also find out that whatever top tier third parties they were managing, there were other top tier third parties that were more important to business staying up and afloat. So they didn't know their critical vendors. They came up with new lists, which made them connect with their other departments well, which was great. They had manual processes by collecting understanding of the impact, and we automated that for them. And then they had response reporting that the executives were asking for very rapidly, and risk identification to be tracked so that once they did find out who was impacted, how would they determine how they were going to mitigate that and in what time frame it needed to be mitigated. With this last emergency directive, it was immediately. And then risk mitigation, tracking holistically moving forward. So knowing that they now have a relationship with that particular vendor, how are we going to help support making sure that the mitigation was done and that they've done upgrades or whatever it was that they decided to do for their mitigation plan. The outreach and the response were a constraint at the beginning because they didn't know how they were going to send it out or if it was going to be an email, and then they had to track all those emails. Some people used vendor threat monitoring, and we're finding that the vendor threat monitoring, not from our perspective, but from any perspective, you just had to make sure that it was accurate. And the solution was they decided to use a very rapid questionnaire that we had created for them. Some companies decided to use specific questionnaires, and some of them decided to use our network approach, and some companies decided to send them out themselves. A pharmaceutical company, I'm not going to say the names, but the first one that I'm going to mention, they had an 85% response rate. And a lot of times when you talk about third-party risk or you talk about third-party risk governance and getting responses, it's very difficult for vendors to respond. But they did some outreach first just to say, hey, we're going to ask you this question. It is not a spam. We need to know. Please let us give this the information. Or they even put it into the welcome help text of the questionnaire to say, as a campaign for this particular vulnerability, we need you to respond. But out of the pharmaceutical company, that 85% rate was they sent out a questionnaire to 100 vendors, 86 of them responded, and 18 vendors were found to be impacted. And so they were able to start rapidly working on the mitigation for those, since it was something that could continue to be a vulnerability to their business. Now on the retail side, there was a 63% response rate at the time that we took these numbers. It could have been a week or so back, but there were 435 vendors that they sent the questionnaire out to, 275 responded, and 5 vendors were impacted. And then the pharmaceutical company number 2 just recently started sending out their questionnaires, and they had they today have a 32% response rate. And they've got 148 respondents out of 467, and 45 vendors were impacted. So you can kind of see, even with this example, that the healthcare state of impact is a little bit bigger than some of the others industries. So go ahead and you can look online. We've got the questionnaire listed out online on our website, but we also have some capabilities that we would love to show you if you'd like to see them. Now, I'm going to do about 4 little slides of pitch for Prevalent, because this webinar is about fourth parties and beyond. So I want to make sure you know that there are other things that we can do for you. We are focusing on an approach that's smart, unified, and prescriptive. And everyone who isn't already should be looking at contextual, data-driven assessments. And able to do that, you have to have comprehensive information, whether it comes from threat intelligence and it's mapped up to your questionnaire responses, whether you have risk remediations that are standard for certain vulnerabilities or compensating controls. You may have risk tolerance that you need to apply your third-party vulnerabilities up against. And having a prescriptive way to automate this is what we are driving towards. We do a lot with automation right now with workflow, and we're going to continue to build that automation into our platform as we go through 2021. Now, risk responses, of course, is something that we were talking about today, and that is making it so much more important for us to have a vendor risk management database so that we're able to see where our impact is, whether it's concentrated, not concentrated, impacting our business, not impacting our business. and then having prioritization on exactly what we're going to work on from a risk perspective. So we're not asking our vendors, our fourth parties, fifth parties, nth parties to work on something that doesn't really pertain or is not relevant to our engagement. And then built-in intelligence, making sure that recommendations are there for your companies as well. So we have benefits at every stage of the third-party lifecycle. Our lifecycle is 5 across. We source and select, we intake, onboard, prioritize and score, assess, monitor, and report and manage, of course. And having a unified business and financial intelligence with our automated risk response is helping to elevate your knowledge of what's happening in your ecosystem. So the benefits of working with Prevalent using this type of a life cycle is we will reduce your costs and risk when selecting new vendors if you're in the procurement or sourcing phase, or even if you do that cohesively and singularly within your TPRM space. We'll accelerate onboarding. We will improve the visibility with all of the different capabilities that you have from a landscape visualization, the way of looking at compliance from a collected source versus just looking at how you're looking at your fourth and fifth parties. You also need to know what compliance is required for that. And if you are able to take that data and look at it a lens from privacy or at a lens from the risk compliance site, then that's going to help you so that you don't have to read through the minutia of everything that's available. There's increased efficiencies, and that's with the risk identification and remediation, of course, and then time savings for SLAs and residual risk reporting. So the people that win with this, of course, we are now making it so that it's not just third-party risk management teams, it's the procurement organizations as well, and IT security, and all of your different other departments that need to look at the information that you collect and gather. Now, from a perspective of a prescriptive approach using this, we've got the intelligence networks that's managed by Prevalent. We use a lot of the same sources and some of our own when coming to bringing that intelligence to you. And then we have our risk management platform that can be either self-managed or in conjunction with our managed services. And then our people. We really pride on what type of people we have to help you in a relationship. And that includes managed services that can help you collect, analyze, and remediate. We also have professional services that can give you a maturity assessment at the very beginning. And that's one of my favorite things to do, is to say, where are we with all the great work that you've done now? And where can we help you to get and reach throughout the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year span? Program development, we have health and optimization approaches that we will go over with you, and then customer success throughout. And Amanda has a question.
Mm-hmm. Do you have built-in controls within your system to capture controls such as cyber security, privacy, and anti-bribery, et cetera? And how does the system treat high-risk engagements?
Yes. So we have the ability to map questionnaires and vendor threat monitoring responses with particular regulatory requirements and compliance. And so that is already there. And say the second part of the question again.
Yep. I already pressed the answer. Hold on. Let's see. Do you have built-in controls within your system to capture controls such as cybersecurity, privacy, and anti-bribery, et cetera? And how does the system treat high-risk engagements?
So high-risk engagements can be configured to have particular risks. So for example, you wouldn't want to give a questionnaire or do a threat intelligence report and use the same risk for someone who's watering your plants that the other company is hosting and processing and storing your data. So the risks can be programmed and configured within your instance to make sure that you are looking at the top tiers with the right risks by service and by type, versus making it so that a person who is maybe not in your building anymore watering plants, because we don't always do that in a hybrid situation very much anymore, but there could be a scenario where you have an outsourcer that has a company provided laptop that's doing work on the company provided laptop. They're already got the protections in place. So you don't want to go through the rigmarole of asking everything that you would ask the other company for their risk information. And then the risk is normalized by what they see from the outside versus the inside, the threat intelligence versus the questionnaire. And those are harmonized and normalized together.
Mm-hmm. A nice little package we have. There's two more here.
Okay.
It says, hi, what geographical spread does your database cover? And do you enable organizations to evaluate risk from cross-privacy legislation boundaries? Example, GDPR, UK, US, Brazil, etc., to evaluate data transfers.
I do know that we have CCPA, GDPR, we've got questionnaires for CMMC. There's a boatload of them. So instead of me going through the whole list, I would recommend reaching out to Amanda, and she can get that list for you to tell you all of the ones that we are up to par with. And we're keeping track of them. And as they come to us, we're doing those mappings and making sure that they're in the systems. We have over 50 I'm pretty sure it's over 50 different types of outbound outreaching questionnaires that you can use within our library. But we also do understand that there are some companies that use standards. We have our own, which is the Prevalent Control Framework. And then there's the SIG Lite and SIG Core. And then there's the HISAC for the healthcare. So again, there's just so many to choose from. I wouldn't want to misstate anything, but let you know that if there's one that you find that we don't have, it will definitely be one that's put on the list, and we'll have to figure out why we didn't see it.
Yeah, we'll sidebar you, Steph. I have my counterpart, Amy, on the line, and she'll be emailing you, okay? Another question is, you mentioned contextual analysis in the tool. Can you elaborate it for us?
Yeah, so contextual analysis within the tool is really making sure that you are getting an engagement by what they're doing for and with you. If you don't have an engagement that has stipulated, this is the service I provide, this is the business unit that I'm working with, this is the service levels that I have, here's my contract that you can look at. All of that information gives you context on what type of due diligence you need to provide. So in our system, we have the ability to do profiling, and that profiling will capture the context. And then from that profiling, it will help to generate within your risk tolerance, if you've set that up, to create a way to tier your vendors. And then it just goes down the chain of, now that you know the tier, you know exactly what package to send them based on the service and the type, and you're asking them the relevant questions. And then if you find during your assessment that something is not asked appropriately for the engagement, because they let you know that at first they said, I'm not using a cloud environment, which most people are, but if they said I'm not using a cloud environment, and then all of a sudden in the profiling, and then all of a sudden down the road you find out that they are, then it's very easy to send out maybe a CAIQ, the Cloud Association questionnaire, that they can then answer those questions if that's part of your package.
Perfect. I'm going to let you continue. There's just a couple more, but I think it will be better for the Q&A if we have time.
All right. I think this is the last slide before we get to the Q&A, so that's perfect timing.
I'm just going to stay on camera then, just do
Please do. You have such a pretty face. You need to stay on all the time. So our trusted partner partnership with you is because we build that on like the relationships I was talking about, trust. We have innovation. We are the 2020 Gartner Magic Quadrant leadership. We have the strongest strategy based off of their evaluation of us. So we want to help you in that space. And then for scale, we are one of the fastest growing vendor networks. We have 128% growth, and it's going to continue to grow with the help of everyone that's using our product. So again, it's not just about the product, it's about the people. We want to make sure that we are giving you a customer success management experience, consultation if you need it, and then helping you to use and leverage the Prevalent platform and all of the things that we have available to you in a methodical approach. So that way you can say, I'm at a maturity level of 4. I want to continue to get to a maturity level 5 in the CMM perspective. We can help you there. Or you might be, I'm just starting and I'm using spreadsheets with sending them an email. How can I take those spreadsheets and put them into your platform and use the mechanics of automation, workflow, risk assignment, and tracking? So we can help you with that as well. And then again, with what we're talking about today, building that VRMDB, the vendor risk management database, and having that information available to you from the procurement perspective all the way to the business connection and to whatever level you want to gather information for, whether it's the 5th, the 6th, or the nth.
Beautiful.
And with that, we're at the QA for real. If there's more questions that you didn't ask, and I believe, Amanda, you have a polling question that you had mentioned at the beginning.
I'm gonna pop it up right now. You guys, please answer honestly. Are you looking to establish third-party risk management program for 2021? We're here to help you guys, so please answer accordingly. And if you want to follow up, say yes, and I will be emailing you. I'll leave it up for the rest of the time, but we do have a couple more questions. One of which is, do you also assist to understand the cost savings moving internal assessment operations to a managed service?
Yes, we have a benefit value return on investment calculator that we can help you with. And there is definitely some savings that you can get with regards to automation and using a platform to support your program and your processes and your people, whether it's one person or more. The one thing that I will mention is I like to talk about it as a cost savings from a resource perspective, where you can move your resources from data collectors to risk managers. And that's where you want them to start putting most of their efforts and time against, is because if you're making risk-based decisions, you need to be focusing on the risks, not collecting the data, and we can get you out of that collection fatigue.
And by the way, that question was anonymous, totally fine. But if you want to learn more, please don't hesitate to use that email that's shown, or say yes to the poll question, and myself or Amy will follow up with you. We'll not know who you are, but you'll get someone to talk to you. Okay, so a couple more questions before we end. For Brenda, it looks like here's one. Is there an automated way to start asking vendors, suppliers, and outsources who they are working with to support our engagement?
Yeah, again, the strategy that I would use is decide, like, even if you were to start your third-party risk program, knowing where to start on who you're going to evaluate, bucketize that. Say, okay, we're going to go to the 4th perimeter, or this year we're going to go to the 5th perimeter. And the way to do that is 3 ways. One is, of course, the questionnaire campaign, where you can include it in your standard questionnaire moving forward, or for anyone new that's starting business with you. The second way is the threat intelligence, so that you can identify who they're working with from a technology perspective and starting to build that vendor risk management database from that. And then third is by having a campaign. I have seen success where if you want to ask your vendors that are even maybe just the top tier vendors, you can send them a questionnaire that is just specific about 4th parties, and they can either answer the questionnaire by uploading a document that says, here's who I am doing business with on our engagement, or they can you can create it in a way that they can enter information.
Perfect. Okay, two more questions if we have time. 4th, 5th, and 6th party approval by our company is written into our contract. What is the best way to capture this information to support building a VRMDB?
I think what this is asking for, and I hope I'm correct, is that right now your contracts are probably stipulating that you do a third-party assessment, or maybe it doesn't and you need to add that, but you have been doing the program with or without that contract stipulation. I would make sure that you've written your contract to, number one, have the stipulation that you have a program, and number two, to say that the accountability is in a chain, a supplier, a sourcing chain aspect, and that you're going to need to make sure that they're finding out who their companies are working with as well and reporting those back to you. I've seen in the past that even with the program that I had run back in the day, we would have approvals that if a vendor was going to be sharing service support with someone else, they would have to ask for approval, and we would be able to see the information from them. Now you can say that it needs to be known all the way to the A to Z point, so all the way down to the end point, and getting that information as well for approval.
We have time for that last cue. Here we go. If I know about the nth party relationships, aren't I accountable for the assessments and risks?
So in a couple webinars back, we talked about the fact that anyone who's getting sued for a vulnerability, or someone who's getting impacted by some financial constraint based on a breach, they always go where the money is. So your accountability is as important as the vendors that you work with. You are basically building a partnership in that relationship. So they're not just going to go after that one impacted company. They're going to also, there could be trickle effect. So to protect yourself holistically, the accountability is a partnership accountability, and I would work on it that way.
Mm-hmm. Building those relationships, the most important for sure. Well, that is it for today, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. Always a pleasure, Brenda, to see your beautiful face every day. Oh, someone made a
Another
comment.
question.
Knowing is important. Knowing and not acting is a disaster. Amen, brother. John Bree. I agree. And I also loved what, Brenda was saying about the people. And for here, I don't even know if anyone's listening anymore, but the people, it's so important. Like, we're real people and we all need to build relationships in order to succeed. And it goes for supply chain, and it goes for working with vendors like us. So that's all my fortune cookie note for you guys today.
And then maybe, Amanda, in the future, we can do a May the Force be with us.
Stay tuned for May the 4th for Prevalent. We'll actually have a Star Wars themed webinar. Okay. Everyone's leaving now. All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye. Stay safe.